country across Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to their elders and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here tonight. And I'd particularly like to acknowledge those leaders who are taking us through this Voice to Parliament and wish them well in the next period of time. But as we get underway tonight, can you please, everyone, stay on mute? We're not actually going to have Q&A as part of the discussion, but we are going to have half an hour dedicated between 8 and 8:30 to actually have small group discussions about some of what we've been hearing from the politicians tonight, but also from Kerry. So we want to make the most of the hour, and then in small groups we can unpick all of what they've been telling us. I'd also like to acknowledge the community independence team that is on board tonight. And myself, obviously, Jill Briggs and Tina Jackson, and project managers Liz and Anyo, and Michelle Dunscan, who's running the Zoom behind the scenes. We're a small team, but everyone in the independence movement are change makers, disruptors, everybody who's part of our project. So it's great to have you on tonight. Now, as we've been talking this year, one of the big themes around community independence is putting community at the centre of politics, not putting politics at the centre of politics. And community, and particularly the MPs, working from an agreed set of values. Now, and we're calling that understanding between MPs and communities a compact. The people vote for them on a promise, the MPs get to deliver that promise, and if they do well, will get re-elected and re-elected. So tonight, we're going to talk to two of those community independents about what this looks like in practice. What does it really mean to put community at the centre of your politics? And I'm just so pleased, Kate Chaney from Curtin in WA, on their different time zone, and Kylea Tink from North Sydney. And to host tonight's conversation, I'm really, really chuffed that he said yes, Kerry O'Brien. During the campaign, Kerry and I travelled around the country talking about media, community, and some of the responsibilities that we as a community have got to set the agenda. Now, Kerry's, many of you know, speciality is politics, and he's totally committed to integrity. So tonight, he's going to lead us through this discussion, and I'll come back on board at 5 to 8 to do a bit of a wrap up and a summary. So over to you, Kerry, and really, really looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks very much for that, Cathy. And I'm actually on Bundjalung country, where sovereignty has never been ceded. And we do have an interesting agenda to get through tonight, and I'll be fascinated to hear what Kylea and Kate have to say about what is now nearly their first full year in the Parliament, and basically take it from there, because I suspect it's been a very sharp learning curve. The theory is one thing, the practice is quite another. And I'd like to ask you both at the start, just how it's gone, you know, whether you've taken it like ducks to water, whether you've found yourself struggling at times, to what extent it has or hasn't been what you expected. Kylea?
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I think I'm not quite sure you would ever be able to go into a role like this and know what you were really stepping into. I'm sure Kate would join me in that. To your point, in terms of the learning curve has been not just steep, but for me, it's been completely vertical. It was like being in a Harrier jet and taking off, you know, at warp speed. So, but having said that, the observation I'd offer is that the first 6 months were at times just completely overwhelming and felt very, very foreign. I'm a business person, you know, business and not-for-profit background. And I've actually found my time in Parliament, doing business in Parliament is like no business environment I've ever worked in. But 6 months in, at Christmas time, I suddenly realised that, hey, I kind of get how this is working now. And in fact, the joy of getting the ideas that this is how it works is now I can start to push against it to try and get it to work differently. And that's the bit so far this year. I mean, we're 4 months into this year, 3 months into this year. And that's the bit I'm really enjoying, because it's when you're talking to a minister, you know, or a staffer, and you're going, well, have you considered this? And they look at you with this kind of startled look in their eye and go, well, it's never been done like that before. And it's like, well, why? Why can't it be done like that? So, yeah, I mean, I said to my guys recently, we did a community event and someone said, how are you liking it? And I summed it up. I bloody love it. Like I think that could be my bumper sticker. I bloody love it. It's such an honor and a privilege.
That's the adrenaline, Kylie.
Yeah.
Kate, what have you found?
So similarly, I'm really enjoying it, and it's fun, and it does just feel like such an honour to be in the right place at the right time to represent the community in this, I think, very optimistic time in our democracy and in our politics. So it's a lot of fun being there with a group of other community independents who have lives outside politics and bring diverse experience to that place. And it has been a very steep learning curve. I reckon we've still got a fair bit of learning curve ahead of us too. We are learning some of the tools, and I've found, still really working out how best to have an impact. And I think you probably never fully know, when you've had an impact and how it happened. But we're building our toolkit, and I certainly have enjoyed it so far. So I'm still feeling optimistic, which is really lucky.
Of course, what the public sees is the chambers is a small part of the debates that take place in the reps and the Senate. What they don't see much of is the committee system. They don't see what goes on in the corridors. They don't see the sort of backroom stuff where lots of deals get made. But do you see a sense in the broad structure of the place? Do you actually have you found a level of confidence, at least in the broad structure?
You go, Kate.
I mean, I think so. Although, as Kylie pointed out, there are also ways that things can be done differently. And I think having had an unlikely election victory, it does make you look at other things that seem unlikely and think, well, I wonder what else is possible. So, we've had conversations about how question time can be improved, and we've engaged with the manager of opposition business and the whip and the government business and the speaker to talk about how to make that a better use of political time, given that that's what the public sees. So, certainly, I think we're now at a point where I feel like I've got a broad sense of how legislation gets developed, how decisions get made, and also, which things we could possibly push on to improve how things are done.
And this is to both of you. How's the response been when you have knocked on doors and said perhaps there's another way?
I think people are genuinely open to it, Kerry. As I said, the first look is a look of shock. Like, there really is this sense of, and I mean, one of the first conversations I had was with the AG in terms of the National Anti-Corruption Commission legislation, and suggested that perhaps, the parliamentary committee that oversees that National Anti-Corruption Commission could actually be a truly balanced, multi-partisan committee. And he laughed at me when I first suggested it, because he was like, no, it doesn't work like that, Kylie. Government has dominance. We do it this way and whatever. But, to his credit, we've seen the legislation enter the House, and it is a balanced parliamentary committee, and the chair is still from the government, but actually the makeup of that parliamentary committee is different to how it's been previously. What I would say, Kerry, and it's probably something for everyone here tonight, getting to know the system is it's actually such an incredible experience in terms of, if you're a curious person, to be able to dig in under it and work out how everything works. But to your point, I actually think one of the biggest things Kate and myself and the other crossbenchers are doing is we're actually trying to lift the veil on that. So we communicate constantly to our communities, whether it's through our digital channels, through EDMs, through our regular newsletters, and all of those devices are all designed to say to people, this is how government works. And the reason it's important it's how it works is because you have the opportunity to get involved in that working. And actually, if I stopped and thought about, the most consistent feedback I get from people, and particularly in the last 3 or 4 months since Christmas time, really well experienced political operators will just come up and go, never seen a politician communicate like you guys communicate. Like, you just constantly sharing what's going on, and you're not hiding behind curtains. So I know you said
what's
you,
coming back, Kylie. When you
Pardon?
so in terms of your constituency, and you're sharing this material with them, what's coming back, and how effectively are you harnessing what they have to say?
Yeah, really highly engaged. We do everything from surveys on particular pieces of legislation through to when the safeguard mechanism was going through recently, at the end of the first week on a Wednesday night, we did a community Zoom and had, people who were working on the legislation come in and do that. And so I think people feel like their opinion matters. And what I'm really trying to foster in North Sydney, and what I think we're starting to see, is the creation of a space where you can have constructive conversations. We don't have to always agree, and we don't, but there is this real sense that if you have an opinion and you wish to express that, then the community is going to give you the space to express that opinion, as long as it's respectful. So, I'm very fortunate to have learned from incredible people like Cathy and Zali, and, those I've got. Most of my campaign is still heavily reliant on volunteers, and that comes down to when I do a government submission, it will be written in consultation with community through to policy positions and speeches even. It really is. I keep saying to my guys, there's no me without we, and I mean that sincerely. Like, if the we starts to back away, I'm out of here, because I can't, I'm part of an organism, and I think that's what I'm seeing for North Sydney.
Kate, same question.
Sorry, I went on mute. Yeah, in terms of what's coming back, I mean, I find this really tough, to be honest, because, I have a lot of events. I have 2 a month. Generally, I'll have a broad community catch up, and then I'll also have a Canberra debrief where I go and talk about what's happened in Canberra that fortnight. But the reality is, a lot of people who come to the events are already engaged and they're already on board. So I'm really focused on how do I actually hear from the people who are not my supporters, but who I also need to represent. And that's really challenging. You can have events, but really you need to go and meet people where they already are. So that's going to community events, having conversations, at the bowling clubs or the Rotary meetings, and picking up people's perspectives and what the issues are that way, as well as the things that you organise yourself, because there is some confirmation bias in the people who are willing to engage deeply with how I'm doing politics.
Yeah, because
May I comment on that, Kerry? Could I just?
Yes,
I don't know whether I've shared this story with Kate actually, but I had an International Women's Day breakfast a couple of weeks ago, and actually the most interesting thing that happened to me is a lady walked up to me at the end of the event and introduced herself, and she's like, "Hello," and I said, "Oh, hi, it's really lovely to meet you," and she said, "No," I said, "I beg your pardon." She said, "No, it shouldn't be," and I was like, "Pardon?" She said, "Well, no, you don't understand. I didn't want you to win." And I said, "Oh, that's okay. That's democracy." She goes, "No, you don't understand. I actively campaigned against you. I didn't believe in what you stood for. I really worked hard to make sure you didn't win." And I was like, "Okay, thanks." And then she said, "But just before Christmas, I got something in the post from you and I read it." And she said, and it intrigued me. And then I got an email from you, and I've been getting an email from you every week since then. And I love it. And she's like, "You know what? I feel like you're really interested in me. And I just wanted to say, when you run next time, I'll be your number one supporter." So I think it is that the people outside our bubble, I guess I just want to say to Kate too, I think the people outside the bubble are actually watching, and maybe they are engaging secretly. And, someone will come up to you at an event and go, "I didn't vote for you, but no, I love you."
Can we talk about the sort of values that are at work here? I mean, are you these disparate individuals from seats that have now become independent, that have some values and some differences? I mean, and how clear are you about what those values are, and how hard is it to stay true to them as you grapple with the inevitable compromises that are the bedrock of democracy?
Great question, and one that takes up a fair bit of my headspace. And I think, and I've thought a lot about, what are the values that we have in common? One of the things that I really like is that I genuinely like all of the other community independents and really enjoy working with them. And that's a great, base to start from. We do have different views on particular issues, and I think that's fine too. And there's an acknowledgement that we are ultimately answerable to our communities, and that's what will drive how we vote and what we stand up for. The things that I think, that drive me, and I think there's some commonality about them, are a sense of optimism about the future of the country, a sense of desire for long-term decision-making, and fairness, equality of opportunity in the country, and that community connection, and really bringing democracy back to community. In terms of how we operate and what we actually do, I think one thing we have in common is all of us are driven by evidence, not ideology. So that acceptance that good ideas can come from anywhere. And we need all the good ideas, and we can't have barriers because they they breach some ideological points of a party. So and community participation, integrity and transparency, really making it clear how this is working and why we're making decisions, and also a bit of courage, I think, being willing to take on the scary bits, because actually if there's more to your life than this, and staying in the job isn't the only thing that's important to you, you can afford to have some guts about it.
Kylie?
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm very fortunate. I actually share our flat with Kate in Canberra. I hope you don't mind me sharing that, Kate. But so I get to have some incredible conversations with Kate, and our other housemate is Mon Ryan. And of us, Kate really is the deep thinker. Like, she really forces us all to kind of go, how did we get here? Where are we going? What are the,
Kylie, I've got to
I
interrupt
love
you there.
listening to her as she
I've
talks.
got to-
I go,
I've got to-
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I've got to interrupt you.
Yeah.
That's the first time in my life I've heard a politician acknowledge that any other politician might actually be a deeper thinker than them.
Oh. Welcome to the crossbench, Kerry. I think that, and actually that's what I was going to say. I do want to echo, I've worked my entire life, pretty much. I was 14 years old. I was out of the door getting my first job. I can honestly say I have never felt such a buzz when I stand up and look around at all the people I get to immediately work with in that circle on the crossbench. And they're just extraordinary people who we do have very different skills. I think the things we have in common, courage is definitely a massive part of it. I think there's a really strong vein of compassion across the crossbench, and curiosity. We don't think we know everything. In fact, we know we don't. And because we know we don't know everything, I think we're really inclined to listen before we jump to judgment. So, and maybe a bit of cheekiness as well. The big joke in the House at the moment is that Milton Dick, who's the Speaker, has actually decided that the crossbench, he calls us the prefect's corner. Because when the rest of the House is going to crap, when government's throwing insults at opposition, he'll look up, and in the prefix corner, we'll all be heads down working or rolling our eyes or whatever. So, yeah, I do. To me, the values are community. Number one, community. All of us have got that front and centre. Courage, curiosity, and compassion. They would be the things that I think bind us. And then, yes, we do vote differently. We will, when certain pieces of legislation come up, we will actually discuss it within ourselves, but we still vote the way we believe our communities would want us to vote. And our communities are different.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's our voting record.
So I'll come back to that business of identifying and representing their values, meshed with yours, I guess. But Kate said, and I couldn't resist smiling inside as you said, long-term decision-making, Kate, because our parliament is substantially built on short-termism. The politicians were capable of thinking long-term up to a point at one stage, but we are all very substantially trapped in this 3-year cycle. But when you talk about long-term decision making, there's nothing more long-term than the nuclear submarine program, where we might take delivery of some of them in 30 or 40 years or something. I've stopped paying attention to the detail. Now, as a group and individually, how on earth, I suspect none of you has had to consider anything in relation to nuclear submarines before you entered the parliament, but how do you wrap your heads around something like that? National security, international relations, is China a real threat? To what extent is it a real threat? How do you get to the core of an issue like that, separately and together? And how do you resist the attempts to seduce you, whether you're given briefings from intelligence agencies or wherever the advice is coming from? How do you deal with that?
Really good question. And I think the honest answer is I don't know. And one of the things about suddenly being in this career, and not having been in it before, is I don't know all the answers. I don't know everything. And AUKUS is a great example where it's really complicated, and there are a whole lot of issues there that are very sensitive. I'm all for long-term thinking. I also have some problems with purchasing decisions that are based on some pretty big assumptions about what the world's going to look like in 30 years' time. So I think all you can do, though, is listen with an open mind to the security briefings, to the opposition, to other stakeholders, and take all of that in and take a position. And one of the things I'm really trying to do is not have a knee-jerk reaction and jump straight into the media on something, as soon as it comes up, because it's complicated. And I want to make sure that I'm not, reacting to the heat of the moment and being part of that daily news cycle, and that I'm taking reasoned, sensible positions that will stand up, over time.
Can we look at The Voice as an example of how you function, how you do wrap your head around issues, how you take a measure of your own constituents' views? So you've got The Voice. You've already had one vote, I guess, on the wording of the referendum, and you're now about to be catapulted into this next stage of the process. So first of all, how do you come to The Voice, and then look at apply your own values to The Voice and your own intelligence and so on, and then how have you gone about taking samples of opinion in your constituencies?
Yeah, so from my perspective in North Sydney, many would know we've just had a state election in New South Wales. So for me, we've probably been a little bit slower out of the gates than I probably would have liked to, but I was very, very conscious that a lot of people that would usually get really active behind a campaign like this were actually really heavily involved in promoting. I had 3 community independents run across my federal seat for state seats, so we were already mobilised pretty powerfully. But I mean, Kerry, I think it comes back to the point that Kate just made. So for me, I've been very mindful of trying to hold a space and create a space where the people who live in this community can have an open and respectful conversation. So my first step was actually to start to reach out to individuals who I knew were already very actively involved in this area. So campaign groups that are already set up, elders from the community, land council people, and really just focus on listening. What was going on for them? What were they seeing? What were their ambitions? Step 2 for us, and this will come in the immediate future then, is to start to take that space that I've tried to hold in small group setting and start to roll it out into larger group settings. So we've got our first major public forum coming up on May 17th, sorry, we've just had to move the date. And then we're going to try and roll it out through a series of kitchen table conversations, because the one thing that really concerns me about what we're seeing at the moment in the debate around The Voice is we're rapidly fracturing, and people who may have very valid questions, who are simply curious and want to understand, I think are in some cases frightened to ask those questions because they don't want to be cast as racist. straight away. So yeah, I know for me in North Sydney, and I have an interesting dynamic in North Sydney where I do have some of the First Nations people here who currently are not on board with the Voice. So now you've got a federal rep who has a First Nations population who is saying they're not going to vote for it, but a wider constituency that want to see it happen. So it's a really intriguing and important moment. And I think it's an important moment for our country, because I think it's the calibre of the conversation that we're able to have that will directly affect the result that we get here. And I'm really hoping that, you know, as an independent, I can create that space for my community to have those brave conversations to come to a positive position.
Okay, Kate.
Yeah, so just reflecting on one of the questions in the chat from Beth was, you know, how can you say you're representing your community when there are always diverse opinions on things? And I think, you know, sometimes in this role, it's your job to reflect the current beliefs of the community, and sometimes it's actually your job to lead. And my background, I've worked in Indigenous affairs in a few different capacities over the last 20 years, and I'm a very strong believer in the Voice as being a necessary, you know, step in closing the gap. So that was a big part of my campaign. I talked about that very openly during the campaign, and broadly was met with agreement. But that was, I feel like I've been honest with my electorate in terms of that being something that I would be behind. The job now is the education piece, and I do have emails from constituents with questions about it. We have to be really careful not to demonise people who have questions.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a really important step for the country and a very modest ask. And so I'll be doing my best to explain to people how I've come to that position, and also elevate the voices of Aboriginal people in my community to help people understand, you know, why it's necessary.
Well, using this issue as a way of getting a better sense of how you are functioning in your electorate. So how you've got a very strong and clear view about the Voice yourself, and you're already aware of some divergent views. What is the mechanism by which you will now go about your ongoing discussions through this process in the Parliament and up to and including the actual referendum campaign? Is there a structure to it, Kate?
Yeah, a mechanism to determine my position or to engage?
So in terms of how, I mean, I think given what you've already said, it's pretty clear to me how you'll function in the Parliament on this, but within the electorate, in terms of the mechanisms by which you will have your cut and thrust, your to and fro with various constituents in kind of I guess, in this case, what you're saying is this is a time for you to lead, but respecting that others have the right to ask the questions.
Absolutely, the right to ask questions, and ultimately, of course, the right to vote differently.
Yes.
I mean, I'll have a series of events and try to have you know, different voices at those events and create environments where people can actually ask those questions and seek more information. I'll be sending material out by post to households. We'll be supporting the kitchen table conversation model as well. And I suppose I see it as something that I will be campaigning on. So I want there to be that open discussion, but I am taking a position on that. And ultimately, you know, when you're deciding how to vote, and I've been asked before, you know, what if there's a conflict between your values and the values of your electorate? The problem is you don't actually know the exact values of your electorate. No. You know, they're disparate, and ultimately you have to be able to sleep at night with the way that you voted. So I treat it as there's an element of I've been elected to do the research, ask the questions, listen, and come to a position, not just to always be an amanuensis for, you know, the voter views.
So to both of you, and this brings us back to the Parliament now, to compare with what you're talking about in your electorates, what have both of you thought about the way the debate has been conducted in the Parliament so far on the Voice since you've been there? Kylea?
I'm extremely disappointed. I think that it's not befitting our country that it so rapidly has disintegrated onto lines of, non-engagement and dismissal. I think this might be a contentious thing to say in this forum, but it's clear that, this government is supportive of the voice. This was one of their primary promises, and I absolutely applaud the Prime Minister, and Linda Burney has worked so hard, and the referendum reference group are an amazing group of people. It's really hard when you've got an opposition the shape of the Liberal National Party where they're just up in their grill the whole time. But to be honest, I'd just sit there wishing that the Prime Minister or the Minister would be bigger than that. And in the context of the House, actually just rise above it to go, well, as the Leader of the Opposition, you're entitled to ask questions. I've tried to answer those for you. We can carry on the conversation. I think that to me, it's incredibly disappointing the Nationals came out so quickly saying no, not going to do it, particularly because they represent such a massive part of rural and regional New South Wales. I do think that some of the questions that certain members of the opposition are asking are fair and valid. And I think when a fair or valid question is asked, it warrants a respectful answer. And at the moment, it's just, it's been deteriorating into a, yes, no kind of scenario. And I don't know. I just fundamentally believe that as the highest office in the land, our federal parliament should model ways of discussion and discourse that are positive for everybody. And I don't feel that leadership's coming through at that level on this at the moment.
Ironic when you set that against the spirit of the discussion through those 12 sets of processes around the country, and then the convention at Uluru itself, the kind of spirit of that.
Yeah, Kerry, can I just say, actually, that's what really hit me just recently. The thought that occurred to me was that the First Nations community did such a good job of developing the Uluru Statement. Like, they really set their heart to bringing the community along with it. And I think to a certain extent, I think we have missed an opportunity to actually mirror that process across the rest of Australia. I think there would have been something quite beautiful in us as a government actually being able to say, well, that's how the Uluru Statement came to be. Let's now transcribe that across our community and bring our whole community along. But yes, unfortunately, the party lines are pretty deep and thick in the Parliament at the moment.
Kate, your reaction similar in terms of the quality of the debate, and I wonder how confidently you can make a judgment about where the questions are valid and where they're being validly asked, and where the questions are designed to muddy waters. And is the government in any way guilty of intimidation? In not, I don't mean the fist raising stuff, but I mean that you're either with this or you're un-Australian kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a real shame, because I certainly in my community have had conversations with people who are not approaching it in bad faith, but genuinely don't know the answers to questions. And a lot of the questions that they have, there are, good and established answers to. And I have people saying to me, genuinely saying, but, how will we define Aboriginality? And, which a lot of people find very offensive that they're even asking that question. But when it comes from a place of not knowing the answer, that actually there are plenty of tests in our bureaucracy, on how do you define how you identify, that's a resolved issue. I think actually being able to just present information and take people on a journey of building their knowledge is much more constructive than this sort of moralistic, if you're not on my side, you're just racist. And I don't think that's helpful. And similarly, on the other side, I think it's very unfortunate that Peter Dutton, I think in some ways, is approaching this to try and work out what is the position that has the greatest political advantage. And I really wish that we could just rise above it and see that this is a long-term step that is good for the country, irrespective of who wins or loses the next few elections.
I must confess that one of the things that had me grinding my teeth a little is been the kind of somewhat dishonest. It's the subliminal messages that sometimes go out, and one of them, the questions are asked in such a way as to imply that Indigenous people might somehow or other be irresponsible or dishonest or in it for the money or themselves or whatever, as opposed to what I think most are in it for, which is justice and equality and all the rest of it.
Oh, Kerry, I would challenge.
Yes, hang on. You set that against our federal parliament and our state parliaments and their long history of not just pockets of dishonesty, but at times institutionalised public corruption in ways such as blatant pork barrelling and so on, and the self-interest that's often displayed in the parliaments long term. It does make you choke.
It does.
But
Kerry, I think the only thing we can do is be different. Democracy is fragile and precious and imperfect, and there will always be these flaws in it. But all we can do is keep chipping away, and I guess just say, look, you can do it like this too. And I think being in the prefect's corner, there is that element of demonstrating it doesn't have to be like that. We can take a different approach, and you kind of need to be a bit idealistic and almost a bit, you have to have a sense of wonder and faith in the democratic system in order to actually show there is a different way to do this. And I think there's an appetite for that amongst the voting public, that they're sick to death of seeing the vested interests and the political games. And there's an appetite for some freshness about that, and a sense of actually saying democracy is good. Let's make it good. Let's use the best bits and make choices to do it differently.
Anthony Albanese said at the weekend, as part of his comment on the Aston result, he said that he treats the independents in the parliament with respect. Has that been your experience, the two of you? And in that same context, can I also ask you what has been your biggest hurdle? Kylie?
I think, I would say that the Prime Minister does treat us with respect. I think that we are an anomaly in the system, and while the system has had brilliant people like Cathy and Ted Mack in the past, it's not had such a volume of people like us. And so it's almost like any organism. It's not quite sure whether to completely embrace us or just try and spit us out still, I would say. I find the Prime Minister, he genuinely will listen. That's not to say we get on all the time. There's been a couple of occasions where, we've probably locked horns or, agreed to disagree around matters. But generally, I'm enjoying working with this Prime Minister. I do think he and his ministry are smart enough to recognise that, in fact, if they can get intelligence from the crossbench that enables them to create even better legislation, it just makes them look better. And so, they're open to embracing that. I don't know whether we would have had that same experience with a different party in politics. The biggest frustration I've got, and I'm really happy to share it here with this group, is we don't hold the balance of power in the House of Representatives. But we do so much thinking and so much legwork. Like we are, we are really working our butts off. And the frustration for me, though, is that what we're seeing is that often we're negotiating or presenting amendments to legislation in the House of Reps, and the government is looking at them, assessing them, and then sticking them in their back pocket and actually passing the amendment in the Senate, so that it actually looks like it's the Senate that got the amendment through, when in fact it came, it has come out of the House of Reps. So that's frustrating. I think it would be, I don't think I would have wanted the balance of power in my first term. I think that would have been completely overwhelming. But I'm not so sure I wouldn't like it in the next one. It might be a bit more interesting.
Okay. So the two things. Do you feel you are being treated with respect by the Prime Minister? And secondly, your biggest hurdle or frustration?
I do feel like I'm being treated with respect by the Prime Minister. I mean, there are frustrations and we have differences, but ultimately the Prime Minister does not need us. He does not need our votes in the lower house as a crossbench. And I think in that context, he is actually making good decisions in choosing to listen to us anyway, and engage with us. And maybe that's, through some political long-term, fear of what might happen next time round. But I think that the government has a genuine desire to have the moral backing of the crossbench on issues, because it builds the platform for whatever change it is. And that's really good to see. I have to say, the opposition has not shown us the same respect. And for example, on amendments to legislation, we are given as little notice as possible, which means you go in and vote, and it's much harder to make an informed choice when you haven't had time to review an amendment properly.
They are much more likely to define you as the enemy, though, Kate, because you guys took their seats.
Well, that's right, exactly. But and that shows in that political game playing. What's my biggest frustration? I suppose sometimes you have to make a choice between having an impact and being seen to have an impact, which is a bit like what Kylea was talking about with amendments happening in the Senate. I'm here to have an impact, and you just have to swallow it, that sometimes you don't get any credit for that, but it actually can get done. So that's part of the political credit is one of the tools that you might trade in order to get something done. But I think if you're focused on having the impact, you just have to, understand that that's how it works.
Cathy, we've had conversations about this in the past, but you were kind of trailblazing in that process as a community independent. Listening to Kate and Kylea talk about the frustrations, you would have had yours, obviously. And I mean, in the end, with 2 terms, you had the time to work your way through all of those things, but you didn't know at the start it was going to be 2 terms. Have you got any, as just listening to them now, what's been going through your head?
So I'm jealous. I am so jealous that they've got each other, because it was me and Andrew Wilkie and Adam Band, and trying to work it all out, and to have each other like that would have been fantastic. That's one thing. But the other thing is, I am just so incredibly grateful that you're there and doing the work, and you can come on now, that there's 213 of us listening to the work, and that we can go, well, we can be really grateful that we got you there, that the communities did the work, and that now you're going to Parliament to do the work. So there's an incredible sense of thank you for that. And then optimism, because it just seems to me that if we could have more of you there, or we could change the way that the parties work so that they would do it better, they could learn that putting the community at the centre is such a sensible thing to do, and it gets you better politics. So that sense of optimism. But the other thing I just wanted to talk a bit about, the other thing I was thinking about is having impact. I used to think about that all the time. How was I going to go back to my community and demonstrate that I was delivering for them? And it was such a non-issue. They could see, they didn't need to be told. They could see that I turned up, that when I spoke to them, when I engaged, and just such a little bit went so far. So when I got re-elected the second time, it was such a surprise to me is how much people loved what we were able to do. And the political capital in the electorate of just having someone who represented them was worth so much. And my standards were, a bit higher like that. So my second term, I promised myself to be so much bolder, because I was so worried, I suppose, about, which you need to be, about doing things for my community. But once I got there for my second term, it was that sense of, oh, my community loved what I did, and they didn't need any more impact, but they wanted me to be the voice, to speak up on stuff. And that sense which I'm hearing from you guys when I listen to Parliament and hearing your speeches, hearing those speeches on the safeguards and hearing the amendments that you all made, I'm so, like, you don't actually have to get the result for us community to know you're being in Parliament to give voice to what we need. And that's enough. So while you'll have other impact on some legislation, it comes and it goes, but giving your community voice is so powerful, and the community hear it and see it and know it. And everyone's just so, I think, one, grateful, but envious, because everybody else wants more of that. So that's what I've been thinking, Kerry. Gratitude, a little bit of jealousy, and a little bit of wanting to reassure you that you're doing a fantastic job and that your communities see it and know it, and are loving it.
Yeah, while you were talking, Cathy, I was thinking a really basic question, and having seen the process from the inside, not just as a journalist, but working for a politician or two, that the hours are extraordinary when you're in the Parliament. It is a 7-day-a-week job, because the minute you get back to your electorate, you're into it there. And particularly the kinds of electorates that you have, where you, if you're in it for the long haul, you've got to establish a kind of a presence in that electorate, which is profound almost. And so how hard has it been at that really basic level when you're in the Parliament? You're trying to get yourself across really complex pieces of legislation when you're talking about the climate stuff. You've got things like the Parliamentary Research Library. You've got your own small skeleton staffs. And you've got the committee system, and you've got to wrap your head around just how the system, all the rest of it. Then you've got to go back to your electors. How are you finding that? How's your stamina? And can you sustain it, Kylea?
It is a huge job. And I mean, I've had big jobs in my life, building the McGrath Foundation from nothing to what it was when I left I thought that was a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day job, but that's got nothing on this. And I think, but as Cathy was talking, as you were just talking, Kerry, I think the point I want to make is I genuinely, one of the things I enjoy most about this opportunity is having the opportunity to listen to people, like to genuinely stop and say, what is it that's important to you and why? And I think that for me, because actually I'm naturally an introvert, so I have to withdraw to repower.
I could see that.
Yeah. But if I wasn't wired that way, like if I wasn't genuinely committed, I sincerely believe in our capacity as a species to make this world a better place. And I sincerely believe we all have a responsibility to do that. And I sincerely believe that if I stay open and listen, nothing is inconquerable. But it's exhausting. And I think probably for me, if we went back and said what was the thing I didn't anticipate, was at times it feels like I've completely lost my life, like my life has become this gig. But I'm happy to do that, because that's what my community asked me to do, and I will do it.
That's a big statement, Kylea.
Oh, it is. But for me, see, Kerry, I think the other thing, and I don't think I'm not going to be here in 25 years' time in Parliament. And actually, I was looking at some of the politicians the other day, looking around the chamber, just actually marveling at the fact that they're still sitting in those chairs 25 years on. I'm like, how can you not have done what you came to do? How can you not have known what you wanted to do, known why your community sent you here, got in, got it done, and get the hell out of here and let the next person come in? So for me, I look at this, and a bit to what Cathy said, I am very focused on the fact my community has given me 3 years to do as much as I can possibly do on the agendas that they asked me to pursue, and I'm going to give them 110% for that 3 years. Hopefully I may get a second 3 years, but I'm not sure. I think that might be me. I think I might do a Cathy McGowan and focus on the second 3 years, wheeling the next person in, because I actually really believe in renewal and revitalisation as something that's important for progress as well.
Yeah, Kate, how are you coping?
It's definitely very full on, but it feels like it's worth it so far. And I think if it no longer feels like it's worth it, then it's time to move out. So I haven't formally said that I will definitely run next time round. I think that focusing on that now is part of how he got into the mess we were in the first place, where there's just this focus on re-election the whole time. But it feels worth it. So it's being in Western Australia. I'm really glad daylight savings is just finished now. It's only a 2-hour time. The 3 hours really knocks you about a bit. And it's tough on the kids and my husband, but it just feels worth it. And I honestly feel like it's what I'm supposed to be doing right now at this time. And so I'll give it everything I've got. And I love both sides of the job. I really love the time I spend here in Curtin, connecting with all these amazing people who live in my community that I didn't even know were there, doing all this incredible and diverse work, and then also the Canberra side, which it feels like it matters. So it's worth it.
Okay, look, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to come to one other aspect of all of this, which I think is really critically important, and that is that other pillar in our democracy, which is the media. On the one hand, we are committed to a free press and all the rest of it. On the other hand, the press is not without its own faults either. So tell me your experience with the media. Where does it sit in the democracy you see as opposed to the democracy you want?
I might kick off on that. I'm very happy to say I think if Australians were to get concerned about any other significant issue in this country, I would hope it would actually be our media environment, because our media environment, in my experience, is not healthy. I grew up in an era, people may not know, but my original background was as a public relations consultant back last century. My kids like to remind me. But when I was doing that, if I wanted to get a story into a newspaper, I had to have 3 separate verifiable sources. I had to have the data. And a journalist wouldn't print unless they were absolutely certain what they were printing was right. Then along comes social media, and we end up in what I think is now a 4-second news cycle. So it's, publish or be damned. I've been really, really disappointed with particularly the press. I think here in New South Wales, I expected to not be a darling for the Daily Telegraph. And in fact, quite ironically, whenever I see them load up a headline of me, I get a bit of a giggle, actually, because I think it must mean I'm quite good clickbait. So that's all right. But the Australian newspaper, I've been incredibly disappointed in. I thought more highly of the Australian. And so I just think, thank goodness, we do have some really good quality online publications that are now out there for people to access. And if I could mobilise again on a broader base, it would be on media reform in this country, to bring it back to a level of independence and integrity and true journalism. Chase the story, tell the story, not just publish and be damned.
Kate, you come from a which doesn't exactly have great diversity of media, but
no, it's
also
true.
what's happening in the Canberra media pod as well. So give me your impressions and your experiences.
Look, I think that greater media diversity is really important, and I'd like to see it. I was visiting a school today, and I was asked a question about media, and I just said to them, look, every time you read something in the paper, have a look at the headline and see and check the value judgment that comes built into the headline. And so many of the headlines that we see draw on fear, outrage, all these negative emotions. And I think we have to become more sophisticated consumers of media so that we can actually see through it and try and seek a diverse range of media sources. And I always start the day with a range of media sources, and it's like sport, really, looking through and seeing how the same story can be reported in completely different ways by different outlets, and all the subjective words that are in there. So I would like to see what has happened in Australian politics happen in Australian media in coming years, because as you say, it is a really important part of our democracy.
So is this a different view now of the media than you had before you were exposed to it in your campaign and going into the parliament?
It's probably just made it very real, because I think it's very easy to, hear, oh yes, we've got a problem with our media, but when you see a story that you've been involved in or that's about you, and you see the overlay that comes with it, it makes it very real. So, I don't think it has changed my view, but it's made me realise how big an issue it is.
Now, I'm going to ask one probably the last question that we'll have time for of you both, which is really taking you outside your own electorate. So I wonder what advice you might have for listeners tonight who live in other communities, other electorates with perhaps a less consultative MP. What can they do to have their voices heard by their representatives?
I'm laughing because recently myself and another independent, Sophie Scomps, actually, we travelled out to an electorate who has an MP who people said that wasn't listening out to a Nationals electorate to talk about gas. So, but in all seriousness, I actually think it comes back to understanding and owning the idea that the person that is there because fundamentally they've been elected by the people around them. So, in the time that you are working with them now as your representative, keep turning up, keep letting them hear your voice. Write to them, go to their office, turn up at their events, make sure they're hearing what it is that you want them to hear. And then, I really honestly, I'll say to this group exactly what I said to the guys at the Liverpool Plains: find yourself an independent and run. Here in North Sydney, my campaign, it was nearly 12 months. I was fortunate North Sydney's independent had established before they found me. Then they found me, and then we got up, and literally I think they asked me to run at the end of June 2021, and we went to the polls towards the end of May 2022. But and Kate and I are probably didactically opposed in terms of the time we had to prepare and run, but I have no doubt that in this very embedded deep blue sea, the fact I had that long to get out there and have those conversations and listen made the most difference for us actually being able to turn this seat in what was a true 3-horse race. Here in North Sydney, we had a very strong incumbent, well-liked.
Kylie, going to have to stop you because we're going to have to finish at 8. So just sort of pick that one up.
Yeah. Anyway, it was, I think that's my advice would be run, find a candidate and get yourselves going.
Very quickly, Kate, you get the last word.
Don't be scared. My campaign was only 4 months long, and 6 months out, 2 people met in a cafe and said, we really need to find a candidate. I reckon we can do this. So don't think it's impossible. Find some other people who are connected to different parts of the community, get together. They made a website and put it out in the paper. But also turn up, speak to your MP, email, find other people who think how you do, and have some faith in our democratic process.
Okay, well, look, I'm not the one who invited you. It was Cathy and her mob, but I do want to thank you very much for the spirit in which you've entered this conversation. Thank you, and back to Cathy.
Thanks, Kerry.
Oh gosh, I'm going to say thank you too, Kerry, Kylea, and Kate. I just feel so privileged to have been part of tonight. So I know that's everybody. So Kate, we'll let you get back to your family and dinner. Kylea, you've got other things you're going to do, so you're most welcome to go. And Kerry, we owe you a debt of gratitude for not only for tonight's discussion, but how you've helped so many of us understand Australian politics and brought that integrity to it. So thank you.
Thank you, Cathy.
So the next little bit is half an hour or 25 minutes of small group discussion. Now, not everybody's going to stay on board for this, but for those who are, we're going to put you into small groups where you'll, and I'll pass over to Michelle in a second to do it. But before I do, I just want to remind you that the next Zoom is on Monday, the 8th of May, and we're going to be talking about networking with intent. How do you network to get a community group going? What are the skills you need? So it's going to be a really practical, fun session. And if you could pass it on to around your networks to tune into it. So that's Monday, the 8th of May, quarter to 7 till 8:30. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now because I'll pass over to you, Michelle. You could just run people through the instructions for the next period, the next 25 minutes, where we ground what we've been hearing and pay attention to what it means within our own space. Thanks, Michelle.